Hi, welcome to Behind the Badge. I'm Chief Alan Rodbell of the Scottsdale Police Department. With me is, will you just wave while I was introducing myself?
I was waving.
This is Chris Vasala, community liaison. How
Hi.
you doing, Chris?
Good. How are you doing, Chief?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Well, here it is. It's April. Unbelievable.
And it's been hot already.
Yeah, it's been
Probably
hot.
too hot in March.
The majority of our really big events are behind us. The season's still here. People are still visiting, of course,
Yes.
and staying in town. And we have spring break coming up, so we have lots of kids out on the street and lots of activities with families.
Yes.
So we're still a pretty active city.
Oh my goodness,
but,
there's so much traffic out there,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah, but we've successfully maneuvered our way through some of the biggest events that we've had in our season. Of course, Final Four is this month, and so by the time you see this, it may be
We'll have a winner.
Yeah, we'll have a winner. But that will create some more traffic, at least in the early parts of the month.
And then when they have snowstorms back east or like, in Colorado, then they all want to come to the nice warm weather. So I think it's going to be a really busy year. I think this year is, to me, I feel like there's been a lot more traffic here.
Yeah, and that's really the topic of our conversation today, is to talk about traffic and traffic safety, pedestrian safety, motorcycle safety. I mean, folks on the roads, but also folks walking and crossing the roads. And so with us today, we have a very special guest, Sergeant Wes Brown of our VCRU, which stands for
Vehicle Crimes and Reconstruction Unit.
Yeah. Welcome, Wes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. So I want you to tell us a little bit about your career, because you didn't just end up in this position as supervisor of this particular unit. You've had many, many years experience in many, many different units within the police department, but your expertise lies in the area
this is where he likes to be the best, because this is his talent.
It is my passion. I'm very passionate.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I grew up here in Scottsdale, Northeast Phoenix in Scottsdale. And in growing up, I went to ASU. I studied electrical engineering. I worked as a test engineer technician for Motorola for a couple of years. And I didn't like working inside all the time in the lab and all of that. So I left that and decided to become a police officer. My dad thought I was crazy. So, he was also an engineer. So I started volunteering with the police department with the then community affairs unit with Chris Vasal. And became a police officer, and thought, well, that was a waste of a lot of math and learning that I did. And became a police officer, worked for a patrol for a few years, and discovered kind of serendipitously this job in collision reconstruction, where we put car crashes back together, and it's all Newtonian physics that we use to do that. And so I took a class in it. There was a training out in Mesa one week, and I took that training class and went, oh, this is so fascinating. So I kind of got involved with that and worked my way to become a detective. And I was a detective in the then accident investigation unit at the time for about 8 years. And then the last year I was there, we had good for the citizens. We'd had a major reduction in our fatal and serious injury traffic collisions. And so I was kind of bored, and I decided to test for sergeant and see what happened. And lo and behold, I made it the first time. So I became a sergeant, and was a patrol sergeant for a little while, mounted sergeant for a couple of years, and then worked my way back to become the vehicle crimes sergeant. So, and in all of that time, I also was able to, I'm an adjunct faculty member now for the University of North Florida, and I travel and teach for them collision reconstruction around the country for engineers and police officers and private investigators that do these kind of investigations.
Yeah, Wes is being very modest.
He is so good with this stuff.
You're really recognized as a national expert in this field, and we're very, very fortunate to have you. And in regard to your dad thinking you're nuts, we both know your folks, and
we do
they're
know
very,
them.
very proud of you and how well you've done your achievements. So in case he sees a copy of this film, we need clarification.
We do.
Anyway, times have changed. In the years that I've been in law enforcement, we went out to investigate accidents, and of course we drew little diagrams using a ruler, and sometimes we had little templates that would give us some diagrams. But it has really become a science in my lifetime as a police officer, where folks can actually take an accident scene and literally put it back together again and kind of explain exactly how it occurred and who was at fault and the speeds that were being driven at the time, decisions made. I mean, you can put this all together, so it's much more of a science day than it was in years past. And so, when exactly did that evolution start? Because I'm trying to remember, but it was in the early years.
Yeah,
Career.
I think
90s, right?
I think it's important to draw a distinction between just a little fender bender collision and what we do.
Okay.
When people ask me what I do, what I tell people I do is I'm in charge of our vehicular homicide unit, because most people, when they think of car crashes, they think of them as accidents. And while, you know, with a little fender bender, I've often told people, you know, that are upset with themselves because they're at fault for this, hey, they call them accidents because they're accidents. If you did it on purpose, they'd call them on purposes. Because in a little fender bender, you don't need to feel bad, that happens. But what we do are the really serious injury and fatal collisions. And I've charged people, multiple people, with up to second-degree murder for their involvement in a traffic fatality. So that science, to answer your question, began in the 80s. Really started, it goes all the way back into the 60s, but it really started to take hold in the 80s and become much bigger in the 80s and into the 90s. And then with the advent of what event data recorders, or what people now call black boxes in cars, it really began to evolve.
Right.
Because now
Technology.
I have instrumentation in the car, in the actual crash car, not instrumentation in a crash test. But this is a real world crash, not a sterile laboratory crash. And so how accurate can I be? And then where are the deficiencies in that machine and what it can record also?
Right, and then in some cases, like Sarge was just at Citizens Academy, so if you come to Citizens Academy, you will be able to see Sarge give his presentation, which was fascinating, and the students were just thrilled with all the information that he was giving. In my sense, you give a voice to the people that are no longer there to give their side of the story, which is such an important element. Besides all the measuring and the speeds and stuff like that, you give a voice to somebody that doesn't have a voice anymore.
Yeah, that's a question I'm often asked by people, is how do you do that? You see so much death, and how do you resolve that for yourself? And I didn't know when I started doing this back in 1999 was when I started doing this, that that would be how that would resolve itself. But what I learned was that I do give that voice to those people because that family needs to find out what happened. And my job is not to put someone in jail for second-degree murder. That's not my job. My job is to put someone in jail that needs to go to jail. So I want to be correct when I go out and we measure the scene, and then we come back to our office and we do the calculations and we figure out how fast cars are going and those kind of things. I want to be accurate and I want to be correct. And the one part of this job that I actually find that so rewarding is the ability to give a voice to those people and to answer questions for the family, because sometimes that other driver that's still alive doesn't need to be charged, but that family needs to understand why that person doesn't need to be charged. And there's all kinds of reasons why that can be. Whenever someone's in a crash, they always think the other person's at fault, almost always think the other person's at fault. And so being able to sit down with a husband or a parent or a child or a sibling of someone who's been seriously injured or killed and explain to them why they are being charged, why the other driver is being charged, or why they're not, is important. And something I never thought would happen is in 3 instances of cases I investigated when I was a detective, I became good friends with the family or very close friends of the victims. And I still stay in touch with those people to this day.
And I can appreciate why that is. I mean, you come at a very tough time in their lives, they're in crisis, and you bring a little calm to it and reassurance, and I think that's always a basis for friendship to develop.
And unknown questions, that's the hardest thing.
Absolutely.
People have questions that they can't ask their loved one for, and hopefully you give them resolution to that, which is so important.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Scottsdale itself so folks can put this in perspective, because we have a unit, they're hearing, we have a unit that investigates fatal accidents. How big a problem is that in Scottsdale, and what are the causes of those, or what are the things we can do to prevent those from happening in terms of our own behaviors? And so let's talk a little bit about Scottsdale itself. So in terms of numbers, you know, when you think about this, we have around 230,000 residents. Obviously some of them are children.
230,000 part of the year.
Yes.
And between January and March, what do we
Yeah,
go
well,
up
we
to?
have up to 9, almost 10 million visitors to our
Correct.
city, crammed
Besides.
into those months. And so there's a lot of traffic on our roads, and lots of opportunities for unfortunate people making bad decisions, bad choices, distracted driving, any number of things that might be resulting in an accident. So just how many accidents do we see a year that of this nature in Scottsdale?
We will go out when there is what I like to call a fatality, obviously, or a life-altering injury.
Okay.
So we have collisions where a leg is amputated. That's a serious life-altering injury for that person. There's going to be all kinds of litigation down the road with regard to that. This person's going to have a long recovery time, and we get one chance to get that evidence. So we go out on all of those kind of cases. Last year we did about 35 call-outs, what I'll call, and they happen at all times of the day. So we're on call 24/7. We get called in the middle of the night on a Saturday night or a Tuesday night or whenever, and we go out. We had about 35 call-outs. Of those 35 collisions that we investigated, there was about 12 fatalities. So 12 people were killed. Now, some of those might have been, and I didn't look specifically at the statistics, but some of those might have been like 2 people killed in one collision. But you can see that a number of those 2 are serious injuries. So people say to me, I was in a bad crash yesterday. And I say, oh, that's terrible. But I think to myself, I don't think you were, because you're relative. That's all relative. I see bad crashes, and it's a long recovery time for that really bad crash. But I understand too that it's all relative, and you haven't been in a crash. If you've never been in a crash, any crash is a bad crash.
Absolutely.
So,
how many people do you have in your unit, Sarge, that do this kind of work?
we have four detectives, and then we have 2 motors that are assigned to me that also assist with those investigations, because they're big investigations when we go out to them.
And you know, what impacts the citizens sometimes is road closures. And I don't know if everybody really understands all that has to happen on these scenes. It's not simply you respond and you fill in the blanks on a report.
Right.
You have to do a tremendous amount of work. I think you brought some equipment with you. So kind of walk us through the why roads are closed for so long, and what exactly you're doing, and what kind of evidence you're collecting, and what kind of equipment are you using? Give us an idea.
That's a great question, and the thing that I always say to people when they ask me, well, why is the road closed for so long, is that, hey, this is a potential homicide, and there's no way for me to know if it's a homicide out at the scene usually. Sometimes I know right away, but sometimes we go back to the office, we start putting things back together, and we go, oh wow, look at how fast this guy was going, and we couldn't necessarily see that. With the advent of anti-lock brakes, we don't have skid marks anymore, so I can't see what's leading into that crash. But when I pull out the event data recorder, I can, and I'll relate that back to my collision and my impact speeds. So we have one shot at that evidence, and you wouldn't close an AM/PM if someone was murdered in a mini mart. You wouldn't, or you would close it. You wouldn't open it right away. You wouldn't open where there was a shooting scene right away. And this is no different. This is exactly the same thing. It's a crime scene, and it's always a crime scene, and our detectives treat it like it's a homicide until they've ruled that out. That evidence on the roadway is often very short-lived. One of the things that with the advent of airbags and pretensioners in seatbelts and crumple zones in cars, and in the last 20 years, the engineering of automobiles has become such that we don't see a lot of car-to-car crashes anymore. When I started in this, we had a lot of car-to-car fatalities. People don't die car-to-car as often as they used to. But pedestrians still get struck, bicyclists still get struck, and motorcyclists still get struck. And especially with pedestrians and bicycles, there is very small trace evidence that's left on the roadway that we need to collect. And we get one shot at it. 3 cars drive by and it blows away, and it's gone forever. Skid marks, they go away quickly. Enough travel time, enough cars traveling over them, those skid marks wear away very quickly, and we don't see them anymore. The best example I can give is a shoe scuff from a shoe. When a person gets hit by a pedestrian, gets hit by a car, they'll leave often a shoe scuff on the roadway. That is gone within hours of the crash. So we need to find that shoe scuff, because that's going to help us establish where the person was when they got hit, which can lead to all kinds of other information. Aside from a position on the roadway and was the pedestrian in a crosswalk, where was their orientation to the car, it can also help us, believe it or not, gather a speed of the vehicle. In a hit and run collision, the only way we may have a speed is by how far that pedestrian's projected after the impact, or the bicyclist is projected after the impact. And so we need to know where they were when they got hit, and I'll know where they were when they came to a stop. That's very, very valuable information. And so to keep the road closed for maybe 5 hours, I would say we rarely keep it closed for even that long, but 3 to 5 hours is about how long we'll keep a road closed for a normal collision, and that's because that evidence goes away so quickly.
Plus, sometimes when you're, investigating at night, you need the light of the morning to see stuff that you might have all the bright lights you can bring, but it's not going to show you the correct evidence until the daylight comes up.
Exactly, and a great example is a hit and run that occurred on Scottsdale Road just north of Frank Lloyd Wright on a Halloween night about 10 or 12 years ago. And actually Discovery Channel did a thing on it, and it's on Hulu on a show called Accident Investigator if anyone wanted to watch it. They do a 20-minute segment on it all about this investigation. But that's a great example, because in that example it happened Halloween night at about 10 o'clock. So we get called out at 10 o'clock at night, we're on scene at about 11, setting up our equipment, going through our investigation, finish at the scene at about 3 in the morning, but it's dark, so I don't know what I don't see. I don't know what I don't know. And so we have to leave that roadway closed overnight, at least until the sun comes up. So at about 6 a.m. we were back out there, and one of the pieces of evidence that we found that next morning, where we literally got down on our hands and knees, 4 of us, hands and knees, and crawled like little puppy dogs down the roadway looking for pieces of evidence. And one of the things that we found was a small silver plastic piece. And I had witnesses are very helpful, but often they just can't perceive it quickly enough. And our description of the car was either a dark colored older Chevy Malibu or a late model silver Honda Accord. Okay, so what that tells me is it's got 4 doors, because I got a dark colored old car or a light colored new car. But I found that silver piece, and the Sergeant Denny Morris, who's since retired, solved this case for us. He will never take the credit for it, but he did. When I explained to him where the damage would be based on the roadway evidence and showed him that piece, I said, I'm leaning toward the silver car and they'll have windshield damage. Well, the next morning, sure enough, he saw a car go in the opposite direction of him with windshield damage and pulled it over, and it was our car. But we might not have solved that had it not been for leaving the road closed all night long. How many people are we affecting in the middle of the night? They have to go 2 miles out of their way over to Pima Road for those couple of hours. And it's unfortunate, and I feel bad that we do that, but that man was a quadriplegic, and actually his uncle is someone I'm still well acquainted with.
Well, that was just how do you say that?
Serendipitous.
Serendipitous. That just proves that it works, and that's a case that just gives you credibility that this is why we have to do it, and this person was one of the people that we helped.
Yeah, and in that case, I still get choked up a little bit when I talk about it, because that man that's a quadriplegic now was autistic and had spent his life trying to live on his own, and had moved down here away from his family to make a life of his own, and bought a home, his own house, and was a maintenance engineer at the Princess, and in 8 years never missed a day of work. Rode his bike 8 miles each way back and forth to work, and he didn't have a driver's license, and he didn't have it because he was afraid he'd hurt someone, because he didn't feel he had the faculties to drive.
Wow.
And so to get hurt by someone, the ironies of that case are so deep, and
everlasting as well.
Yes.
Tell us about the equipment you brought, because this helps you recreate the actual scene of the accident.
Right. This large piece of equipment that we have over here it's survey equipment. It's what we call a total station. This one's made by Topcon, and this one's actually robotic. That doesn't mean that it's going to go out and shoot the scene for you, but usually there's someone operating the head here and someone operating a pole with a small mirror on the top of it. And you have to sight that. And what this does is uses light to measure distances, and then it knows within it certain angles, and it just uses trigonometry and right angles to figure out how far everything is away, and it allows us to create a scaled diagram. The robotic part of this one is that it will actually follow that small mirror on that pole for one man. So it's a one-man operation. So it'll actually follow. Now we can do it both ways. We can also do it with a two-man operation. And it'll also work without a prism. So it's what's called prismless. So if you don't want to use that pole with that mirror, which is really a prism, you can actually just aim it at certain points of evidence, and it will actually
and then it just
measure
gives
those.
you the distance of where it is.
It actually
from?
creates a scale diagram for us.
Okay.
So then we take that to our computer, download all that information into our computer.
Which draws it.
Which draws a diagram. And then we have to go in and add things to it and change things. It'll also scan for us. So like the Faro system that we have, our crime scene people have, similarly, this will scan a scene for us. And we can use that to recreate damage assessments on cars. Something interesting about cars, when you have two cars that come together in a crash, is as they come together in that crash, they stay together at the same attitude until all their forces are exchanged, and then they go separate ways. The neat thing about that is that if I then go and measure and make scale diagrams of the two crashed cars, I can put those two cars back together like a jigsaw puzzle piece and figure out what angle they approached each other at. And we do that regularly with when we have two cars come together, which we don't have as often as we used to.
So I can't imagine what court is like with all the new science, because it's very hard to argue the science. I mean, you can argue the conclusion an investigator comes to without the science, based upon their observations, their senses, their investigations. So you can argue all that, but how do you argue the science?
Well, and oftentimes what they'll argue brings me to this next piece of equipment that we have here, and this is an accelerometer made by Vericom, and this is an older one, and next year I'm working on acquiring a new one, a much more updated one that will help us out a lot more.
Is that just a budget request on television?
Yeah, that's why I put it out there, just so you know. It might come across your desk.
Yeah.
But this one actually measures the frictional value of the roadway for us. So we can go out and do skid testing with this, and it's going to measure the frictional value of the roadways for us. And that's something that's often argued by defense experts in court as well. The friction of that roadway, you used a much higher value. Well, no, I didn't, because I have this piece of equipment right here that verifies that for me, what that frictional value is. It works in some instances. There's other instances where it doesn't. If I have a locked tire, that works great. If we have damaged vehicles where the tire is significantly impeded by damage, but it's rolling but not free to roll, then we would need a load cell, and I haven't put in that budget request yet, Chief.
So where's this get attached to?
It's got suction cups, so actually I have it upside down right now. This part's right side up,
Okay.
but you would actually attach it to the windshield.
Oh, okay.
And then you would operate it here, and it automatically starts when it experiences a less than or about a tenth of a G of negative acceleration. It wakes up and starts measuring that acceleration for you.
It's amazing.
Fascinating.
It is so fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, he kept talking at class, and he was showing video, and everybody was just like, they were just kind of like asking questions, and it's nice. This is why I thought it was very important that we bring this to our show this time, Chief, because people have so many questions about this and about accidents and about the roads being closed, and I think it's just important that people understand why.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we have some suggestions for our viewers in terms of how they can be as safe as possible in terms of when they're on the road, when they're riding bikes, when they're walking across the street. I mean, I know it's simple, basic common sense, but we have so many accidents involving pedestrians that's like, what can we do to prevent those from occurring?
Pay attention.
The most important thing that people can do is remember that they are responsible for their own personal safety. And go to any grocery store parking lot and drive in front of the store and watch how many people just walk out in front of you in the parking lot without even looking.
That is so true.
So the most important thing they can do is you're responsible for your own personal safety. So pay attention to what's going on around you. That driver might be doing something wrong. Absolutely might be doing something wrong. But if you step out in front of them, the fact that they're going 70 miles an hour in a 45, yes, they're wrong, and yes, they're gonna be charged for that. But you're going to be dead.
And if you didn't walk out, you won't be
so pay attention.
So much of that is just patience.
It is.
Making sure that people see you, making sure they're slowing down, make sure they're giving you the right of way. Otherwise, let them go and walk behind them.
Absolutely.
But I see that all the time, as you say, not just in shopping centers, but you see it even on the streets.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to throw this out because my husband and I were in a parking lot just the other day at a grocery store, and there must have been like maybe a 4 or 5 year old that was running to their car by themselves, just running. And I just was sitting there in such shock, and I saw the parents walking behind this child, but you have to realize that a child at 5 years old or 4 years old or 6-year-old, depending on how tall they are, cannot be seen by a driver that might be backing out of a parking space. And this child was running by themselves. So parents, please be careful with your children. That could have been a tragedy that I would not have wanted to witness.
And the child doesn't perceive the danger either.
The child does not perceive the danger. So just pay attention and think.
Make sure you're seen. Pedestrians at night, there's a man named Jeff Moutart. He just did some training for us here. He's a great I love human factors. He's a great human factors expert around the country. And one of the studies he did was he took some like Day-Glo green fabric and like a neon reflective. It was actually reflective too. And he used the same surface area, and he started with a rectangle. He put a rectangle on a pedestrian and had that pedestrian walking, and he would have people tell them when they could identify what they saw. And he had distances. And he broke this down into a bunch of different ways. He started with this surface area, put it right on their chest right here. The next thing he did was he broke it into 2 pieces. So he cut it in half basically and wrapped it around their arms. And then he cut those 2 pieces in half and wrapped 2 pieces around their arms and 2 pieces around their legs. And then, this was the really cool thing, he took those 4 pieces and cut those in half. Now you have this really thin strip of reflective material, but he wrapped them around the elbow and the wrist, the lower thigh, and the ankle, and people could immediately identify what it was.
It was a person.
Interesting.
It's a person walking.
Wow.
Because of the biometrics of how that person walks, they could immediately identify it at night. And remember, at night, you can't be seen. You can't be seen at night as a pedestrian. So make sure you're wearing the appropriate clothing, because at night you have to identify what it is, and people can't react to something until they know what it is that they need to react to.
One more burning question, sorry.
I was going to go ahead.
One more question. I know we're running out of time. Is it best to run against traffic or with traffic? I always want to know that.
So jogging, you want to go against traffic, and the reason for that is because as humans we can instantly change direction. And so I need to see if a car is coming up onto the sidewalk or into the bike lane, and I'm jogging along because there is no sidewalk, I'm jogging along the street, I can see that car and I can jump out of its way.
Okay,
if
so
I'm going
go
with
toward
traffic,
the
I
traffic
can't see it.
instead of
As a
having traffic
pedestrian.
behind you. I just want
As
to
a
clarify
bicyclist,
that.
you're required by law to go with traffic.
And I was going to mention that bicyclists need to understand that they really are held to traffic laws. And
Absolutely.
so don't take it for granted. You're on a bicycle, you can just blast through intersections, not stop at lights.
I've written
and
cyclist tickets
Yes.
for running stop signs.
Okay, good. Hey, I want to thank you. This has been a wonderful segment. Really appreciate you being here, Wes. Appreciate
Thanks
all
for
the work
having me.
that you do. And I'm sure people at home, as I am, just amazed at the science around traffic collision investigation today, from what sometimes we experience with those little fender benders when somebody just comes up and takes our information, to even the way we did major accidents in the past. So thank you so much for sharing with us all this
Thank
great
you.
information and all that
Good
you
job.
do for us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So this is another month of Behind the Badge, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Until then, be safe and be careful on the roads. Take care. Bye-bye.